وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I want to thank you for being here. And for those of you in the back, please just have a seat. We will begin now. This session is called Activism for Palestine in the United States, Setting the Agenda and Meeting the Challenge. As all of you know, the issue of Palestine is one that is very important to Muslims, very important to everybody who cares about the human rights violations that are occurring on a daily basis in that area. And we all know that our country sets a very large precedent with regards to Palestine. So we, as the activists, we as the people who care about human rights, we as the people who believe in this just cause of Palestine, need to do our part to help set that agenda, to set the parameters of what's going for the work in Palestine in the United States. Today we have a very distinguished panel of speakers to discuss with you how we're going to set that agenda, how we're going to meet those challenges, and inshallah ta'ala how we will work to change the perception and to change the way things are working in the United States for the work for Palestine. We will begin with our first speaker immediately, Brother Nihad Awad, who really does not need an introduction. He is the Executive Director for CARE. He is an outspoken individual on rights for Muslims, outspoken individual on rights for Palestinians as well, and somebody who knows the system that we're talking about, somebody who has worked within the United States system and knows how that change can come. So we're going to ask Brother Nihad to talk to you today about the practical steps in addressing that challenge, addressing that agenda. And so without further ado, Brother Nihad Awad.
Assalamu alaikum. Is there a party on the other side? Well, I promise you, it's not going to be as entertaining as the other one. So, but thank you very much for being here, because this is a serious business. This keeps sliding, so I need to stop it. Meanwhile, enjoy the music on the other side. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be with you. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All praise due to Allah. Thank you very much for coming. We are going to be really competing with this side, so I want you to focus with me. I'm trying to see what song are they singing. And at the same time trying to tell you what I'm thinking to tell you. I think they are too loud. If we send someone there to at least, yeah. So I'll give you like a few seconds. And I would like to thank the sister for doing the interpreting here for some important guests. Okay, ready inshallah? Traditionally, the first speaker will tell you about the Palestine and all of these things, but I think we're changing the format. I will tell you what to do. How's that? Then they will add meat to what I say. But needless to say, I will just say a few remarks to remind myself and you where we are. And I'll give very practical steps. So if you have a pencil and paper, get it ready, because I'll give you some specific information. First of all, the cause of Palestine is a just cause. We are all aware of it. I'll be very, very surprised if any of you is not aware of the nature of it. The second point is the issue of Palestine in the US is strategic for both the United States, for Americans, and for the world. we should understand that the U.S. support for the State of Israel has been unconditional, with almost no limits, no accountability, and has been having devastating effects and impact on the international interests of the United States, its credibility, its image. And those who support the cause of justice for the Palestinians always are puzzled. How come this great country that was built on the values of liberties, freedom, justice, prosperity, how come this country is siding with an occupier who has no respect for human rights, human dignity, or respect for even international law? Not only that, the State of Israel has been financed, supported, and defended by the government of the United States over decades. It does not align with our values that we are very proud of as Americans. So where is the secret there? How come we defend people in Darfur, and we're calling for independence and referendum in Sudan, which is soon going to be two countries, to give the Southerners the right to independence, or in other places, and we call for justice and we put force behind our statements. But when it comes to Palestinians, it works the opposite. It doesn't make sense. And nobody can, in the right mind, to stand up and defend it. Then where we are is there's something missing. What's missing is the public is not well informed about Palestine. It has been misinformed and misfed systematic information and one-side positions, to the point that the victims have been blamed. The perpetrators have been shown as the victims. So one of your first homeworks that I will suggest to you is, of course, to read. Read the book by the late Edward Said, Blaming the Victims. This is a book because it shows the art of blaming the victim. Now, in terms of how can we bring justice to the Palestinians while we stand on principles and from an American traditional point of view, not to completely let down Israel, but to be fair to the Palestinians and to the Israelis. If we just want to be very, very pragmatic, and to the United States government and country to be fair-handed, then a lot of work needs to be done. Now, for the past so many years, people spend a lot of time calling the White House and calling Congress, and they asked the president to say something, to do something about whether the bombings of Gaza, the building of the settlements, the demolition of homes, the uprooting of olive trees, the deportation of Palestinians, the targeted killings of innocents, and the destruction of the Palestinian economy. All of these things, people will call, they will write, and they spend a lot of their energy. And what's the result? Nothing. Not only that, even if we have a president who believes that there should be a better and more fair-handed approach to the issue of Palestine, or the so-called Israel-Palestinian conflict, we have seen in President Barack Obama. What's the result? Does Israel listen to him? No. He said in his speech in Cairo to the Muslim world, and he asked Israel to stop the expansion of the illegal settlements, because the building of settlements on occupied land is a violation of international law. It's violation also of American law. and therefore America cannot give financial or military or material aid to any state that builds illegal settlements on occupied land. So President Obama, to open new page with the Muslim world and to give sense of hope to those who believe in shift and change in the US policy, directed his speech at Israel and said, you have to be responsible, you need to do 1, 2, 3. And he also turned to the Palestinians and he put certain conditions and demands. Did Israel freeze any settlement? It did not. Not only that, to bring Israel to the table of negotiations, to talk about long-term solution to the conflict, the United States government begged Israel to stop building settlements. Israel did not. The States bribed Israel. They gave him billions of dollars and promised to give him arms just to freeze the settlement buildings for 90 days. They came, the Israeli delegations came here, and they put so many conditions. They exploited the American generosity, but also they exploited other things. I will explain. What's the end result? Nothing. Israel's stiff position is the same. What's the impact of this stiffness towards the President of the United States and the office of the presidency in the United States? It's really the erosion of the image of this country around the world. Nobody even takes the administration seriously when they talk about the peace process now because of Israel's behavior. So we, in the activist community, we always call on the President, on the White House to do things. But there's nothing being done. Why? Because the second power lies with the Congress. Members of Congress compete with each other, whether Democrats or Republicans, to please the Israel lobby, to please Israel. Some of members of Congress are willing to put the interest of Israel ahead of the United States' interest. Why? Because we have to understand what drives members of Congress. Is it values, principles, or votes and money and pressure? The pro-Israel lobby has mastered deception, pressure tactics, and exploiting the system of giving money to candidates and putting pressure on candidates with either scandals or what have you. And they managed over many years to have this huge influence on not only members of Congress, but those who want to be elected officials in the United States. I'm not exaggerating the power of these people, but I'm talking about the effectiveness of those people. So people are losing hope in the White House to do something effective. They're losing hope in Congress, because even sometimes without the Congress asking, without Israel asking members of Congress to do something, members of Congress rush and they just run towards Israel to do something that pleases Israel. To the point that when some Latin countries started to recognize the state of Palestine, members of Congress wanted to issue a resolution to condemn these people and to prevent the United States government from recognizing the bare future Palestinian state. Then we're losing hope in Congress. Where do we go? We go to the media. Can you see fair reports about the Palestinians in the media? Hardly. Not maybe the mainstream media. Maybe the alternative news media on the internet, some liberal and progressive ones, and they are self-censored. Then where do we go? We go where we have to start. We cannot change the US foreign policy towards Palestine from the top. It has to start at the bottom. We have to educate others. Before we educate others, we have to educate ourselves. Many of us, those who are Palestinians or Muslims or non-Muslims who believe in justice for the Palestinians, they think because they know it is a just cause, they think that this is enough to talk about Palestine. This is wrong. We need to educate ourselves about specifics of this conflict and how this issue is hurting our government, it's hurting our economy, it's hurting our status in the world, it's hurting our claim to be a just society, liberal society, progressive society that goes to the aid of the weak and the oppressed, when we in fact do everything to the opposite when it comes to the Palestinians. We need to understand the mechanics of how the US public has been misfed and influenced and has been given the wrong information about the Palestinian side. Then I would suggest to you to do the following. Focus on the grassroots. Give 90% of your work with your classmates, your co-workers, your clients, your neighbors, the churches, the synagogues next to you, the schools, the public meetings. All of these people are your audience, and these should be your first priority. But you need to do the following. I would recommend to you to read the following books. Number one, The Israel Lobby by Professor John Mearsheimer. He and Professor Stephen Walt, they wrote a strategic paper and book. It's called The Israel Lobby. In that, they show that Israel is not as pro-Israel supporters claim, that it is a strategic ally of the United States, and that's why the United States has to be on the side of Israel all the time, no matter what Israel does. This book is an objective research, first-class scholars in political science from the University of Chicago and University of Harvard. Both prove, without any shred of doubt, that Israel has been a strategic liability on the United States. And it uses facts. This book uses facts. And they have evidence to show that. I would recommend this as a first book for you to read after blaming the victims. A second book, The Israel Lobby,
the author,
John Mearsheimer. If you Google The Israel Lobby, his or another person will be almost the second hit on Google. The second book is by former Congressman Paul Findley, who has a very interesting and courageous experience in defending the cause of Palestine and justice. He paid a heavy political price, but he also inflicted a heavy price on the other side when it was the nature and the tactics of the Israel Lobby. His book, he has 3 books actually. One is Silent No More, They Dare to Speak Out. He talks about the establishment, those who tend to speak against Israel and what happens to them when they take fair and just positions. And he shows the depth and strength of the lobby and its nature. It is very, very important to understand it, know it, if you want to counter it effectively. The second book he came with is even much more powerful than that. It is called Deliberate Deception. He takes the fallacies of the pro-Israel activists and he goes after their claims one by one. And I think it is very, very important to look at their claims and how to respond to them from an American perspective. Give me 2 minutes, inshallah. Another magazine you should subscribe to is the Washington Report on Middle Eastern Affairs. Google it, subscribe to it. It is written and prepared by mainly former US officials in the Muslim world, in the Middle East, and they love their country. They love the interest of the United States, but also they give you a clear and good analysis of the news and issues and Congress and who's doing what. But also, the most beautiful thing about this magazine is they publish a list of how much the Israel Lobby on regular basis gives in terms of contribution to members of Congress and those who run for public office in the United States. Those who like math, those who know how figures work in Washington, D.C., they will know that there is a sign the influence of the pro-Israel lobby on members of Congress. I'll give you an example. Members of Congress serve in different committees: Armed Services Committee, Foreign Policy, Economics, Education. And the pro-Israel lobby, they go to those committee members and they give them donations. For example, I'll just give you an example. It's not exact, but you can get the idea. Those who work on the Economic maybe committee, they give them maybe $250 contribution in 1 year. But those who work on the Armed Services Committee, they give them $250,000 contribution. Now, some people asked, there are so many Muslim and Arab American organizations in Washington, D.C. How come they're not as influential as the pro-Israel lobby? There is a myth about that. How many pro-Israel organizations are in Washington, D.C.? Give me just a guess. No, I want you to be realistic. Don't give me thousands. Just, I mean, can you name them? You cannot name more than maybe 4. Do you think of more than 4? Here's another book you need to read. It's very important. It's called Stealth Pacts. Stealth Pacts, P-A-C-S apostrophe. This book talks about the political action committees. These are 527 organizations. They collect money, they raise money. They raise money and give members of Congress. Now, by law, each PAC, Political Action Committee, cannot give more than maybe $6,000 per election cycle per candidate. So no matter how powerful or just your cause is, you cannot give more than that limit. So the federal government limits the influence of PACs on elections. So what the pro-Israel under AIPAC conglomerate decided to do, they created 124 PACs. Hardly any of them has the name Israel or Jew in their names, like City PAC, Metro PAC, Environment PAC. That's why they're called stealth PACs. They do not have Israel in their name. All of these organizations, when they decide to support a candidate against another candidate, they pour hundreds of thousands of dollars on one candidate, while his opponent may not get more than $10,000. So who will win? Obviously the one who has more money, because they buy airtime in newspapers, on television, because 70% of the campaign budget doesn't talk about the candidate's views. It talks about attacks on the other opponent. That's where most of this. Is that useful? Is that useful for you to know? Okay, I'm concluding. Another website you need to look at and benefit from and download forms and information and invite the speaker of that organization is If Americans Knew. If Americans Knew. It's one sentence, but that's the name of an organization. It's founded by Alison Weir. Some of you have seen her work. Scientific approach, content analysis of the news coverage of the conflict, talks about the side of the Palestinians and the Israelis in figures, and critical analysis of this, that I believe when Americans knew this, they will wake up to the reality that Israel is hurting the United States. Now, 2 more comments. There has been a shift in the past year. Good shift. The military for the first time. And the military has huge credibility in Washington, D.C. When the Department of Defense comes for any budget request, hardly any member of Congress will say no, because this is for national security. For the first time in the history of the U.S.-Israel relationship, the commanders, the military leaders of the United States have said that Israel is hurting the United States. And this is a major shift. They recognize that what goes on in Iraq, the intensity of the fighting in many places, they blame Israel for it, that Israel is instigating this anti-American sentiment because of what Israel does. Israel is putting America in jeopardy. And when the military, the US military says so, people should listen. And now I believe there's a growing movement within Congress and in to distinguish between America's interest and Israel's interest. Now, to help the public understand more, they need you. They need you to become active. Don't wait for others to speak up or to organize. As Paul Findlay in one of his books said, be a committee of one, which means do it yourself. Don't wait for others. You have the information. You have the conscience. You know what's right and what's wrong. Go and present yourself to schools, to churches. Knock on doors. Say, I'm your neighbor. I live in this area. You don't have to be Palestinian to talk about justice for the Palestinians. Say, I would like to come and talk to you about any issue. Maybe the issue of the Palestine-Israel conflict is dear to my heart. I know some information. I would like or suggest to you to have a panel discussion. Bring different viewers, different presenters, but introduce yourself. Let people have this discussion at the grassroots. Then, work with candidates for public office, not only members of Congress or the Senate, even at the city council level, at the district level. That's where a lot of investment the pro-Israel lobby is putting. They take these people to tours to Palestine. They show them the settlements, but they don't show them the refugee camps. They take them to Tel Aviv, but they don't show them Gaza and what Israel has done to Gaza. They don't show them the destruction that Israel has done to the Palestinian life and infrastructure and future. They take him and they brainwash them. And also they promise them with funds and with votes. So when they come here, they see the Muslim and the Arab and Palestinian side not organized, doesn't have a vision, doesn't have a plan, doesn't have the resources or the commitment, then they go to the side that has the commitment, has the resources, even if it's unjust. So to close the gap, information, commitment, willingness, and believe in justice. And justice is on our side. I believe we can do it. But before I leave the podium, and I know you're getting nervous, but I believe this is useful. In your communities, think about 527. Political action committees. Any one of you can have a committee, political action committee, where by law you can raise funds from your citizens and give it to members of Congress or to candidates for any public office, and make it part of yearly plan. Deduct a few $100s or a few $1,000s from your budget if you want to bring justice to the Palestinians, and decide that this will go to political contributions, and bring your candidates and go and visit and have it systematic. When you meet with your members of Congress, they will come for two reasons: money and votes. They should know that you have the money, the community is resourceful, and the community is not poor, and the community can make a huge difference if we decide to make that difference. When you bring them, you don't have to talk about the issue of Palestine from the beginning. Introduce yourself to them. Learn about their positions and see the gap that you have to close, if there's any, and I'm sure there are many, always. And plan your relationships. Don't make it one time and that's it. You don't like their position? Work on their position. Plan that this position should change in 5 years if it's too hard. But if they see you serious, if they see you on the day of the election, willing to stand in line to vote for them and are able to bring money for them, and when you meet with them again, you hold them accountable for their voting record, they will take you seriously. Today, we ask people to vote, to register to vote, and they go and vote, but those we vote for are not held accountable by us. That's why you don't know how they vote. Most of the time they vote against our issues because they don't take us seriously. We spend a lot of energy in voting, but we don't hold them accountable. They work for us. They work for you. And you should have them been accountable. That's it. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Nihad. I was getting nervous, and I'm still a little bit nervous, but it was very, very helpful. Jazakallah khair. Our next speaker is going to be Brother Uthman Atta. Brother Uthman is an attorney in Milwaukee. He's also the former president of the Islamic Society of Milwaukee and a very, very big activist in the Milwaukee area. He will talk to you a little bit more in general, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I just want to go over things very quickly because I know there were some questions that were at the a little bit earlier session, and you may have some more questions. This is supposed to be more of a what exactly should we do in terms of activism, setting the agenda, meeting the challenge, and so forth. Brother Nihad covered a lot of areas, and I just want to maybe just go over and emphasize a number of things from that I think we need to do and we need to concentrate on. The first issue is obviously education. When I'm saying education, I'm saying first education on community about our own issues. So if you ask me what is the most important thing that we should do, education, education, education. We need to know about our issues and we need to know it in detail. Brother Nihad indicated or listed a number of books and other things. We need to know what the narrative is, the historical narrative. We need to know what the legal aspects of it are. What are the UN resolutions that exist? What are the aspects of international law that really support our particular cause? And there are many resources out there. AMP has resources. If Americans Knew, there's the Institute for Palestine Studies that has a lot of very highly reputable books about the issue. And there's other books that are out there, including by individuals who are not from a Palestinian or Muslim background. Norman Finkelstein and many others have actually written material that is actually very, very good and very, very, very helpful. We're also in the age of the internet. There's tons of websites out there, not only the websites of the organizations I've just listed, but there's websites by End the Occupation, the Electronic Intifadas out there, the Jerusalem Fund. Brother Nihad mentioned the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs. They have a website of older issues. There's another website called the American AMEU, Americans for Middle East Understanding. They publish a monthly called The Link that just covers one particular topic each month. Again, all of their archives are on the website as well. So clearly we have the ability to learn and know our information backwards and forwards, to be very, very familiar with it. And this is something that we as a community, especially those who go out to speak and so forth, need to know. On just a general basis, for just a regular person speaking to your neighbors, speaking to friends, the most important thing is to just have your own personal narrative, to know your own personal story of what happened. Because that is more important than really anything else if you're talking to a person on a one-on-one basis. If you could tell them what is your story, what happened to you, what happened to your family, what happened to your neighbor, what happened to the people of your city, how you were ethnically cleansed, what you can do, cannot do. I mean, these personal stories of how the occupation and what has resulted from the occupation, how it has affected you and your family and so forth, nothing will compare to that when communicating to individuals on a one-on-one basis or to small groups. Forget the resolution. I mean, you could quote the Balfour Declaration, UN Resolution 242, 465, anything that you want. Personal stories are going to convey the most effective and long-lasting type of information that you will convey to others. Again, but for those who go out and speak and are going to debate things, you need to know the facts. Second, you also need to know the enemy's narrative. You need to know what are they trying to convince people of. And they come up with all kinds of convoluted arguments and information. You need to be aware of them and you need to know how to challenge them. You need to know their weaknesses. Where can you really go after them and attack them? Obviously, there's issues of human rights violations, the racist comments and statements that are made. I mean, when you had the 50 rabbis come out with a statement, these are Zionist, militant, extremist rabbis. They basically came out with statements about not renting to Arabs. You have many others that come out with many, many different statements. These are individuals who hold important positions in the Israeli society. You can talk about the intolerance that exists. You can talk about the laws that they passed. You can talk about the discrimination that exists. You can talk about the negative effects that these policies have on the United States and how they're inconsistent with U.S. values, and how individuals who happen to be Israeli, when they try to say that Israel is like the United States, how that is an insult to us as Americans, because we do not share the kind of values of hatred and bigotry and discrimination and occupation and theft of land and so forth that the Israelis have. Now, AMP and other organizations have the ability to send people to your city, to train people, to help really give people the resources that are out there. If Americans Knew and other organizations also have information that you could download. When there's a lecture, you could distribute information. You could give people information in many, many different ways. There was even, like, for example, for Christmas card that talked about Bethlehem. And it says the occupied city of Bethlehem, and it talks a little bit about Bethlehem, but it's a Christmas card, okay? What's wrong with that? Let your friends know, what exactly is going on. Use something that is effective. Some people in one city actually were giving out a little rolled up piece of information with a candy cane on it during Christmas time, just passing it out to people to let them know about what is going on in Palestine during Christmas time. I mean, you could come up with all kinds of creative ways to really just get information. But the information has to be creative, it has to be credible, it has to be prepared professionally. Second thing, how much time do I have? Few minutes? Okay, just real quickly, second thing we need to do is we obviously need to get the information out in the media. Monitoring articles and editorials in our local newspapers, meeting with editorial boards, writing letters to the editor, going on to newspaper blogs and online letters and so forth. There's so many ways that we can communicate our message, and I have never had problems with people actually getting things published. It's very, very rare. If you meet the guidelines of what they require, you're writing something that is professionally done, it will get published. So we need to really engage with the media and know the media. We have the ability to also do so online. There are online publications that are sometimes effective. I'm not talking about just some little, unknown sites. I mean, there are sites that are highly, high numbers or large numbers, I should say, of individuals are on these sites. Those are things that we need to watch over. The third item is engaging with religious groups and churches and others, where we will ask them to actually be able to come in to speak to particular Sunday classes that many of them have, to be able to convey our information. And what you could do is you could actually hook up sometimes with other individuals that would allow you to get into these churches and so forth, so that you could convey this kind of information. The fourth item, and I'm trying to go through these just very quickly, the fourth item, universities and schools. The pro-Israeli groups are investing unbelievable amounts of money and time and resources in trying to sway what goes on university campuses. And what they do is they keep complaining and whining that, they're having a hard time competing with those who are articulating the Palestinian narrative. As if we have governments that are behind us, supporting us, giving us information, and pushing us. We only have volunteers. They have big institutions, big organizations that are pushing their people to basically perpetuate the lies that the Israeli government wants to have the people in this society believe. We need to continue to effectively work on campuses, and alhamdulillah, we're doing very, very good work. There's many individuals who are involved in this process, including many. When Jews for Justice is one of the organizations that has been listed by the Anti-Defamation League as being one of the most anti-Israel groups. They listed 10 of them, and Jews for Justice is one of them. I mean, there's a lot of allies out there that we need to work with. I'm sorry?
They listed us too.
They listed CARE as well. Yes, they did absolutely list CARE. So we're proud of that, alhamdulillah. Okay. Finally, the last item I'm going to just touch upon is, and Brother Nihad touched upon it, which is government officials, lawmakers, at all levels, from the aldermanic level all the way up. We need to meet with them, we need to talk to them about our issues, we need to vote, we need to make sure that in our masajid and other people are registered to vote, and that's the only way that we're going to be effective. We must be out there, we must be public, we must be vocal, we must not be afraid to express what exactly it is that we want done, to express the rights and aspirations of the people, occupation. We need to represent them because they do not have the ability to represent themselves in the society. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakumullah khair, Brother Uthman, and thank you for doing that enlightening speed. I appreciate it. The next speaker will be Brother Hatem Bazian. He is the co-founder and chairman of the American Muslims for Palestine and a lecturer at UC Berkeley. And tafadhal.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So I'll try to be as fast and speedy as Uthman, but maybe slow down a little bit toward the end. I would like to focus on specific actions and specific work for us to undertake in relation to the Palestine work in the United States. And I would like us on the PDS campaign because PDS is the global strategy that is being used to specifically deal with Israel as a state that has been systematically engaged in violation of the 4th Geneva Convention, in violation of the United Nations Charter, in violation of subsequent charters of the United Nations, including the Indigenous Peoples' Rights, including the Political and Civil Rights Charter, as well as the Convention on Racism and Apartheid. Israel has systematically been in violation of a host of these measures. Now, when we say PDS, what do we mean by PDS? These are acronyms for a specific campaign: boycott, divestment, and... So first, let me define for you what boycott means for us to understand. Boycott is a form of pressure through non-cooperation. All right, so it's a form of pressure in the form of non-cooperation. Is consumer action that includes academic, cultural, sports, and product boycotts. So when we speak about boycott, it covers these elements. For example, if there is an Israeli sports team that is coming to your college or is being hosted at a city, that team should be subject to a cultural boycott and a sports boycott. So what you do, you organize a protest, a picket line, you call the city, you call the agency that sponsored that event, and you have to make your voice heard. Saying set does not cut butter. Saying I don't like it does not make any change. So you need to take action by engaging in boycott. So a sports team, an academic who's coming from an Israeli university that supports occupation, and so far not a single Israeli university have spoken or taken a position against the occupation. More so, most, if not all, the universities in Israel are intertwined with the structure of occupation. They do the research for many parts of the Israeli occupation, including psychological research, including some of the earliest research on mapping the Palestinian community in the 1930s was done by Israeli universities. They have the archive. For example, during the Intifada, the first Intifada, the Israeli army confiscated archives of Palestinian historians in Nablus, in Ramallah, in Jerusalem. Those collections ended up in some of these universities. So as a university, you have to make sure that you actually engage in boycotting these institutions. Product boycott is another part of the boycott. Many Palestinians, many Arabs, many Muslims, they go to our grocery stores and the shelves are filled with made in Israel product. We have the Sabra hummus. All right? You need to make sure that that is not an item that you pick, nor you put it on your cart. Also, many of these products that often use Arabic terms on it, you need to flip the can and find out where it's made of. The fact that you have an Arabic term in there doesn't mean that it's made by an Arab country or by Palestinians and so on. So you need to be a conscious consumer with your own funds and with your own money. So that's product boycott. And when you boycott something, you need to inform the store or the manager who has the purchasing power of why you are actually boycotting that product. You have to register your complaint. Otherwise, you are not translating your action into a greater impact and informing this manager that purchased or the store owner of what the reason that you have undertaken. Now, boycott is an actual ability for you to control your money. So that's important, that you're actually being conscious in what you spend. Divestment, the second part. Divestment is selling of stocks or bonds from a company profiting from practices. This is done by institutional investors like churches and universities. For example, if you have many churches, the Presbyterians have a social responsibility clause for their investment. And they make sure that they do not invest in companies that are enablers of the occupation. For example, Caterpillar is a company that is an enabling company for the occupation because it has these big, huge bulldozers that are designed by Caterpillar for the demolition of houses inside Israel. They know about it. Caterpillar knows about it. It's a company that is in the US. It's actually a very profitable company. And if you look at many of the investments for universities, for large investment bonds, retirement account, you'll find that they put some of their money in Caterpillar. You have to make sure that you take action, right? And it's something that takes time. It's not something that you could just complain once and all of a sudden, alhamdulillah, they end it. No, you have to be sharp and engaged and go back and again and again and again. Where sometimes, for example, during the affirmative action campaign, Jesse Jackson recommended for people to buy stocks in these companies that we want to have a campaign of boycott, because that gives you the ability to vote on the shareholders meeting, and if you have a large number of shareholders, you could actually petition for that item to be on the agenda. So you have to be part of a variety of elements of the strategy once you commit yourself to the strategy. Remembering from the South Africa process, because we were engaged in the South Africa anti-apartheid movement, it took about years for registering victory in the anti-apartheid movement. So I see the 5 minutes, so I'm going to grab it from you. So it took about 30 years for that first victory to come by. So you need to be a person that knows the end goal, but don't be caught in the losses and the changes that takes place as you partake in this campaign. You have to be a person that's looking way down to the future, but knowing that these are important battles to take. Sanctions, on the other hand, which is the last one, are economic and diplomatic restrictions imposed by governments and non-governmental agencies in terms of the United Nations against other governments. That's going to be the most difficult part in relations to the United States. You might get city councils that will actually have a social responsibility and engage in imposing sanctions in particular aspects of the Israeli economy. For example, if you know there's a product that the city is getting from settlement production in the occupied territories, you might have a good chance in some of the city council members' subcommittees, they have subcommittees on peace and justice, to advocate for a resolution that supporting or getting products from that particular settlement, and that product is in violation of the charter of the city. Which means that in your strategizing, you have to pick which battle you take on. And that strategy revolves around knowing the information, collecting the information, and strategizing about it. Let me say, why do we choose PDS? For us, it's important. So I told you what's PDS. Why? Well, one, it's moral. You are actually saying that this is a moral statement that individuals that engage in the PDS, this is a moral position that they need to take. Second, it's effective. It's a strategy that has been used by Gandhi when he had the salt boycott and clothing boycott against the the British occupation of India. This is something that Martin Luther King in 1963-64 in the United States used against corporations that were not hiring African Americans in the South and also part of the Northeast. It's a campaign or a strategy that has been used by the anti-apartheid movement with Bishop Desmond Tutu and the ANC. It's also a strategy that has been used right now, and interestingly enough, some of the biggest advocates for the sanctions in Sudan came from the pro-Israel Zionist movement. So in here, that strategy is actually an effective strategy. Also, it's a non-violent strategy. And it's actually interesting. Often you hear these people say, why the Muslims are violent? And then when we pick and say we will have a strategy on PDS, they say, oh, now you're anti-Semitic. So when we engage in violence, right, if there's violence and there's the intifada and the uprising, they're complaining that you can't. They could beat you up with violence, but you can't use violence. This is part of the contradiction between the colonizer and the colonizer. The colonized gives themselves the right to use violence without any limits, but when the colonized resists and uses violence against the colonizer, then the colonizers complain that you are crossing the moral boundaries. Well, there wasn't any moral boundaries of colonialism to begin with. But in here, once again, that is a non-violent strategy that enables us to engage. Third, PDS is a grassroots process or a grassroots movement. The reason that there's been failure in relations to Palestine is that it has been centered on attempting to resolve the Palestine issue. Well, these governments are the ones that created the problem to begin with. It's like going to the wolf to run away from the fox. It is the international community, the 5 permanent states in the United Nations. They are the ones that actually created the Palestine conflict. They're the ones that sanctioned the dispossession of the Palestinians. And the United States in particular has been providing diplomatic, military, economic cover for Israel to carry on its activity. PDS takes the power from the government and puts the initiative at the grassroots level. And therefore what we have is actually, there is a superpower in terms of the United States at the government level, but I would say that there's a superpower level among the people, and there's a global movement that is looking at Palestine as the central focal point for resistance and for bringing together a movement to bring about change, not only in Palestine, but challenging what is taking place in Iraq as well as Afghanistan. Lastly, in terms of the effects of, or the success of PDS, is that we already have a host of coalition partners. AMP is committed to the PDS campaign. We're also part of the United States-US campaign to end the occupation. Many churches already have joined and they are on board. The Presbyterian are on board, the Unitarian are on board in terms of the campaign. There's a whole European infrastructure right now on the PDS campaign. We hosted a conference in Canada that brought activists from across the world to begin debating and discussing how to effectively have a PDS campaign. We're in constant communication with the South Africans who actually led and participated in the apartheid through a PDS campaign. So there is a global infrastructure that essentially moving to extract, not concession, but extract a legitimate adherence to principles that are enshrined in international law and principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that movement right now is registering successes. The United States is going to be the most difficult arena for the PDS campaign. You need to understand the United States will be the most difficult arena for the PDS campaign, because this is the place where Israel gets about $11 billion a year. This is the place where Israel gets its full diplomatic cover, where it could shoot the Palestinians and get the United States to cast the veto in the United Nations. It is this place where Israel can get an economic faucet open to it constantly. This is the place where it have a media PR manipulation of its actions and get the PR cover in here in the United States. And therefore, they will fight at every juncture to prevent BDS from succeeding. However, every time they think that they could stop the PDS campaign or the pro-Palestine campaign, it actually increases its intensity, because at the end of the day, they're attempting to sell a product that's called Israel that is not healthy. It's not good for your health. Israel is not a good product to sell. Israel is a state that is engaged in systematic human rights violation. Israel is a state that is in violation of the United Nations Charter, is in violation of the 4 Geneva Convention. Israel has been understood to be at the center currently of the conflict that is taking place in the Middle East, and therefore they will have a hard time convincing the American public that they are on the justice, and the Palestinians who are defenseless, 6 civilians that are innocent, they are the guilty party that needs to be resisted. And therefore, I am hopeful and confident that we will succeed, but it is a difficult road, and inshallah, we will have a PDS campaign that will succeed in the United States. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakumullah khair, Dr. Hatem. Actually, our time is actually up. There are quite a few questions. Maybe we can just, I know Maghrib is supposed to be at 4:55, so maybe we could take 1 or 2 of these now and then see kind of how that goes. The first question is to Brother Nihad. It says, Brother Nihad spoke of the Israel lobby. Can Muslim Americans form a lobby of their own in the next 5 to 10 years? And then please elaborate on how and when we can get there, and what is a good timeline to aim for.
The word lobby is not like an intimidating word. There's no person or entity that can say or claim to be the lobby. The lobby is like a group of efforts from individuals and institutions and supporters who put pressure on elected officials and policymakers to take a position. Now, if these people work as full-time to influence the policies of the government, then you can call them the lobby. But the actual lobby is the collective pressure from the grassroots, from civic organizations, clergy, academia, think tanks, the media, all of these efforts designed to shift policies of the government from A to B, that is considered the lobby. Now, some people have that as a career, those who work like in Washington, D.C., and I believe the collective work of the Muslim organizations is to bring justice, not to be not to ask the U.S. government to take one side against the other, but to be fair. Now, to answer directly, which was another question, how to form a PAC. Google exactly this sentence, how to form a PAC, question mark. And that will show you how to do it step by step. You have to file with the Federal Election Commission. And you have to work with a lawyer or a good accountant or a CPA, because it requires some filing. But that's how the influence starts. It starts with the grassroots. I assure you, in every major city and state in the United States, there are PACs by the other side that are they report, they raise funds, they give them to candidates, and with the funds they give agenda, and they give a task list and positions for the candidate to take. So forming PACs should be some of your targets for the next maybe 1 year or 2 years. It is not hard to do, but it is a must if you want to have an influence. But in terms of lobby, inshallah, it will be the collective efforts from the grassroots towards whether the federal government or any elected official at any level that takes a position vis-à-vis justice in Palestine.
Next question I have here is, what do you think high school students should do to get the word out? I assume the word out regarding the issue of Palestine. If one of you can just take that question kind of quickly. What should high school students do to get the word out about Palestine?
Well, I think that it's the same just discussed. It's beginning of really educating yourself and educating the individuals in your schools. Oftentimes there are world history classes, or there are particular clubs that can be formed in schools. I know that the Israeli government sometimes has individuals coming in and actually visiting high schools. I mean, this is one of the ways that I actually really got involved in this issue, that when I was in high school, and that was just a couple of years ago, when I was in high school, there were actually some Israelis that were coming in, and they wanted to talk about their experiences in Israel. And so they came to my class, and I challenged them. And then my teacher at the time allowed me to go to every class that they went to and challenge them in every class. And so, again, if you're familiar with the issues, familiarized, comfortable, it's all, you're not going to know everything at one time, but you have to start learning. You have to start, with other, people who have the same interest. You sit down together, you debate things with each other, you role play and so forth, so that you could become an effective advocate for this cause.
Okay, we only have 4 minutes before the Salah, so for everybody who would like to be on time for the Salat al-Jama'ah, I suggest you leave, unfortunately, now. But I know Hatem has one more question.
I have a few questions in here. One is about the students walkout in protest of the IDF soldier at the University of Michigan. This is a good strategy. It also was used in Chicago. It was used also in Seattle. So it's effective strategy. You have to be creative in your strategies of how you implement boycott, divestments, and sanction. You have to respond and see what will be the best for your own campus and for your own place. Some places actually they had one of the speakers, and then they flew a plane that was having a sign which is "in the occupation" or "stop funding the occupation" in the graduation ceremony. So it's $500, and a plane was going around the graduation ceremony, and this is another way. So you have to be creative. You have to find a way to get the message to people, but don't be confrontational with the general audience, because we often assume that everybody is there is a Zionist or a pro-Zionist, and we misidentify the 97% that are not Arab, not Muslim, not Jewish, or not Zionist, not Jewish. We identify them being pro-Israel. So I think you need to be very clear of identifying how you reach your message to the audience that are there. The second question had to do with the arrests or the subpoenas that took place in Chicago. There's a number of activists that have been, their homes and offices been raided, and AMP have issued a public statement about it. This is part of the intimidation of activism relative to Palestine. It's not new. This has been taking place since at least the 1980s. One of the longest standing cases in US history was the LA8 case, and it just ended just 2008. So we need to be aware, work with the civil rights community, the ACLU, National Lawyers Guild, in order to be effective in this arena.
And just a reminder, I know that Rabbi Weiss sent us this note. He wants you to know that not all Jews are for the occupation. There are many Jews who are against the Zionist state of Israel. Many of those Jews are against the Zionist state of Israel, and he would like you to visit the website nkusa.org to see more about that. I think that's all we have time for, unfortunately. I know we have many questions.
Assalamu alaikum. Just one more thing. Many people do not know their members of Congress, know their representatives. It is very, very simple. You should be aware of those who represent you. And if you have your pencil handy, you should call the Capitol Hill switchboard. Give them your zip code, and they will tell you who represents you, who are your 2 senators and representative. The number is 202-224-3121. Again, 202-224-3121. Thank you.
Jazakumullah khair for your attendance, and don't forget to go to pray Salat al-Maghrib. Jazakumullah khair.
أنا هذول اللينك constitution